So we did refactor this code, as I told you, but still I also told you that it would not work like that. Why? Because, as I mentioned before, just referring to functions like this won't work if they do sit in another file. That does actually work in the browser, but not with Node.js. There you have a strict separation between files. Therefore, by the way, in restaurant data.js, the code would also not work because I'm accessing the fs thing here, which is coming from the built-in fs package, which is part of Node.js. And whilst I am requiring this here in app.js, I am not requiring it here in restaurant data.js, and here the same thing applies. Just because some function or some value is available in file A does not make it available in file B. So if we want to use the file system package here in restaurant data.js, we again have to require it here, like this, by calling require fs again. And that is a super important rule. If you want to use a certain value or object or function in a file and it's not defined in that file, then you have to require it. Now that will fix this error, but it does not fix the issue that these functions which we wrote ourselves in restaurant data.js won't be available in app.js. But we can fix them with the new knowledge we got. All we have to do is require our own file. And that is something we haven't done up to this point, but it is something which hopefully makes a lot of sense. You can require built-in packages, and you can require third-party packages. You can also require your own files which might contain extra functionality. And that's what we'll do here. I'll add it below the built-in packages and below the third-party packages, not because that's required, but because that's a common way of structuring your different requirements, so to say. I'll add my own requirement for my own file below these require statements. And for that, I will add a constant which I name resData for restaurant data. And I will require my own file here. Now, how do you require your own file? You don't just use the file name. That would not work, no matter if you add an extension or not. Instead, you have to add a path to your own file. You don't add a path for the built-in and third-party packages. There, you just use the package name. But for your own files, you add a full path. So if that restaurant data.js file would be in the same folder as app.js, then you would add /, which simply creates a relative path in Node.js, telling Node.js that this file is a neighbor, a sibling file of the file in which you have this code. And you do omit the file extension. You don't have to add .js here. Here, however, restaurant data is not in the same folder as app.js. Instead, it is in a subfolder. It's in the util folder. And hence, the correct path would be /util/restaurant data. That is how you express a path in Node.js in such a require statement. Folders and files are separated with slashes, and you start with // to make it clear that this path is relative from app.js in this case. That's how you include this file. However, there is an extra step which we also have to perform. This is the correct way of requiring it, but by default, your files don't expose anything to other files. So just because we have these two functions and this constant here in this restaurant data.js file does not mean that this is then automatically requirable by other files. It's not. Instead, you have to explicitly mark which parts of this file should be made available to other files. And you do that by adding an extra instruction at the bottom of this file. You write module.exports and set this equal to a JavaScript object in which you can now add the different things which you want to expose. For example, if I want to expose getStoredRestaurants, I could add it like this. Here I have the key name, which I can use in other files to refer to this function. And here I have a pointer to the thing which I want to expose. And very often you'll have the same names here, but you could choose different names. So this name on the right side of the colon here is the name of the thing which you want to expose to other files. So this is not up to you. If you do change it down here, you also have to change it up here in the function definition. This name on the left side of the colon, on the other hand, is up to you and is the name by which you are able to then use this function in other files. Here I'll stick to the same name, but I could choose a different name here on the left. Very important, you don't add parentheses here. You don't execute getStoredRestaurants. Instead, you just use the name of the function because you don't want to expose the result of calling that function, but the function overall so that it can be called in other files. That's why you only use the name here. And then I add a comma to also expose store restaurants. And here I'll also point at store restaurants like this. And now with that, I am exposing or exporting, as it's called, these two functions. Now, because of this extra addition, in app.js, requiring this file will actually work. And there we now have this REST data object, this name is up to you, which is in the end just this object which you are exporting. So it will be an object with two methods, because I am exposing two functions here, and functions in an object become a method, or we call them a method. So now we can use the REST data object here in app.js to call these functions, and that's then the last step we gotta do. So if I want to get my stored restaurants, I don't call getStoredRestaurants like this, but instead I execute a REST-data.getStoredRestaurants. So I refer to this exported object, and then there I call this specific method. And I'll do the same for storing, so for saving restaurants back into this JSON file. And now we can do the same in all the other places where we are getting our restaurants, like here when we get the details for a specific restaurant. I can now replace this code here with the REST-data.getStoredRestaurants, and then I just have to store the result of calling this function in a variable or constant here. And since I'm using stored restaurants as a name everywhere here, I will just store it in a stored restaurants constant. And the same here where I get all the restaurants. I replace this code here with this line where I call getStoredRestaurants and store that in a constant named stored restaurants. Now with that, if I save everything, this actually crashes, and it crashes because in restaurant-data.js, I'm not just using the fs package, but I'm of course also using the built-in path package. And I'm not requiring this here yet, but as I mentioned, we should require everything that we rely on, because just because it's required in another file doesn't make it available here. So to make this built-in path package available here as well, we should add this path constant, which we get by requiring path, so this built-in package. And that's another step which we need to take. Now with that, we're almost done, but now there is a subtle error which we also have to fix to make sure that everything works. And that error is related to this line in restaurant-data.js. In there, I am constructing a path to this restaurants.json file, and I copied over the code from app.js. This way of constructing a path was correct inside of app.js, but it's not correct in this restaurant data.js file. And it isn't correct here because what I'm doing here is I'm constructing a path where I start in the directory where this file is in, so in the util folder. Then I dive into a data folder, and then there I look for restaurants.json. Now this is incorrect because the data folder is not inside of util, it's instead on a higher level. Hence we need to fix this path. I want to start in my current directory, util, but then I first of all want to go up one level to the project folder and then go into data. And we can easily do that by adding an extra segment here in path join, and that's the ... segment. Now this might look strange, but that's a standard way in programming of expressing that you want to go to a higher level directory, so that you want to go to the parent directory of the directory you are currently in. So if this points to util, then this here, after going up one level, will point at the project folder. And then there we have a data folder into which we can dive. So that's a little adjustment which we have to make here to navigate into the correct folder in our project that contains this restaurants.json file. And with that, if we save this, if I reload here on restaurants, I get my recommended restaurants, we can view the details, and we will also be able to share a restaurant. But now we restructured our code and our app.js file is a little bit leaner. And whilst all of this was a lot of new knowledge, which might not seem like it was worth the effort, after all, we didn't move that much code, it is crucial to be aware of refactoring in general and of how you can split your code across multiple files in Express. Because in any realistic website that you are going to build with Node and Express, code splitting like this will be common and is something you have to understand. And that's why we will actually not stop here, but take it even a step further in the next lecture.